If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. Hi there. Today, let's talk about confidence. I see the question forming in your mind. Hey, Larry, this is not the Do Confidence Right podcast. This is the Do Busy Right podcast. And you're right. So the question then becomes, what does Do Busy Right have to do with confidence? And I'm really glad you asked that question. To make the connection, I'll share a story. In my season of life right now, my daughter's entering the career world. She's finished college and now has to find a job and a career. And she's faced with entering conversations and situations that she's never experienced before. Naturally, her confidence is not very high. And I see this play out in two primary ways. One, she tries to avoid certain situations. And two, she fears the implications of being nervous. So I'm thinking about it, trying to help her with confidence. The topic of confidence has come up in other discussions with clients about imposter syndrome and various other facets of the confidence picture. So I thought today I'd break it down so that we can think about where confidence comes from and how to get it or how to improve it. I'll say confidence attaches at a very significant point in productivity. You've heard me talk in other episodes about delivering. Maybe you've heard me talk about the fact that the work is not done until the result is shipped to the customer who needs it. And you could argue even that no value has been created in the world until our result is in the customer's hands. So anything that interferes with delivery is a productivity issue. And I believe that lack of confidence is one of those things. In order to do busy right, we need to have solid confidence. In the knowledge work world, lack of confidence hurts us in two primary ways. One is a short-term way and the other is a long-term way. The short-term problem is if we're not confident in what we do, then we hesitate to ship our results. We hesitate to deliver, whether that's in a product sense, a sense of sending out my result, or a do I take the meeting, what do I say in the meeting kind of sense. Even in a selling scenario, it comes up when we have to ask somebody for a commitment. The other effect is the long-term effect. If we're not confident, then we don't handle feedback well. If we don't handle feedback well, we avoid the primary information that we need in order to grow and get better. So today we'll talk about what confidence is. We'll talk about the specific kind of confidence we need. I'll talk about how to grow that confidence. And I'll talk about the kinds of feedback that we need to gather in order to be better, in order to be more competent at what we do. When we tie all this together, I'll show you why confidence is necessary for high levels of productivity. Particularly in the knowledge workspace and increasingly in business generally, we're specialists. We have a particular skill set and we know that skill set as well as or better than anybody else in our organization. And this puts us in an interesting and frankly fairly new position for us as workers. We are now the final decision maker on whether or not the work is done. If we decide when it's done, then we've got to have a certain level of confidence about our result, or else we just fall back into iterating over quality, iterating over relatively minor aspects of the product. We wind up working on relatively tangential parts of our result in an effort to try to reassure ourselves that it's a good product. The first effect here is we hesitate around delivery. We waste time. Not all of it is wasted, but some of it is. If we hesitate on delivery, inventory accumulates. In other words, if we move something along to a certain point and we go, oh, well, I can't deliver it yet because it's not done, then it sits there in our inventory until we have enough time or enough energy or just get tired of seeing it or worried about the deadline. And then we go in and begin the process of trying to convince ourselves that it's good enough to deliver. This entire time, we've got a product that has costs already sunk in it. We've already spent time. We may have spent money in order to get the product this far, and those things are just consumed. If we think about a product, for example, inventory collects up. We've already spent the money, the time, machine time, personnel time, and the raw materials to get it to its present point. But if it sits in our warehouse, then we can't turn that spent money into income. Inventory has a cost. Now, I understand that the accounting terminology around inventory makes it an asset. Yes, it is an asset. You can generate cash by selling it, and that's the definition of an asset. But it has also consumed a lot of resources. And in some way, those resources are just sitting there, unutilized. I suggest it's the same thing for knowledge work. When we produce a product, whether it be a report, a podcast, whatever it is, if we hesitate on the done decision, then we're increasing our inventory. We spent time, effort, maybe dollars in producing the product, but until we deliver that product, we simply can't get paid. So in that sense, we're delaying the delivery and we're not turning inventory into sold product. When lack of confidence interferes with delivery, it slows us down, and that's this first order effect. And it parks a lot of cost in a place where it can't be turned into value. The long-term problem is if we don't have confidence, it can hurt us in getting better at what we do. This one's a little tricky because on the one hand, in order to get better, you have to know where you're weak. And some views of confidence don't include any weakness. We'll get into that here in a minute when we talk about what real confidence is. But if we're not confident, then we're emotionally fragile when we get feedback. That means we're scared to get feedback. It leads to us ignoring feedback. It leads to us dismissing feedback. But in the long term, feedback will help us build our process. It helps us strengthen our offerings and helps us to be better at what we do. Now, feedback works in two ways. One, it's motivation to build our processes, to improve our processes. In the other sense, it gives us specific areas to improve. So not only does it say, hey, in this area, you need improvement, but it's also a broader motivation to have a process. As you probably know, one of the ways that top performing athletes approach confidence is they have confidence in their process. They do it the same way every time. I'll say both of those things are a challenge, but if we're not seeking feedback, then we really don't have the best raw material for improving our process. So lack of confidence really hurts us in both these ways. We don't want to deliver, and we don't want to listen to ways to improve ourselves, our product, or our work. I told you that we'd talk about what confidence is and what confidence isn't. A lot of this material comes from a book by Nate Zinsser called The Confident Mind. He shows what confidence is and how we build confidence, and also what happens to us when we're pushed into a situation where our confidence might be low. how to have the best performance in these situations. And we'll unpack all of that. We'll contrast this real confidence to some ideas of fake confidence. And I'll even bring in a related issue that I mentioned earlier, and that's this idea of imposter syndrome. The first point is that confidence is a mindset. It's a well-developed, refined mental approach that we either intentionally or habitually take on. And we take it on when we face certain kinds of situations. Situations are perhaps high stakes. Maybe we need to achieve a result in the work. Maybe we need to press send on an email. But the mindset is in the performance world. And it's particularly hard when our performance is going to be observed by other people. It's not the only time confidence comes into play, but a lot of times it is a multiplier of the need for confidence. Confidence is a mindset. Confidence is built. It's constructed in our world, and there are good ways to do it, bad ways to do it. But we have to do it. I doubt that we're just born with confidence. Zinsser tells us how to go about constructing that mindset, what kinds of evidence to use, how to use it, and when to deploy it so that we can expect the best performance. Real confidence is based on evidence, which is closely related to our previous performances in similar situations. Confidence is based on a reliable, tested, consistent process for creating our result. And it's built on training, on solid preparation, or practice. Whether that practice was in a practice scenario or in a live fire exercise. So that's what real confidence is based on. And it's a mindset of, I've done this before. I've faced this situation before. I can point back to evidence where I've succeeded in this situation. And I want to make that pretty clear because there's at least one kind of, I'll say, counterfeit confidence. It's counterfeit, it's shallow, it's not robust. I'll use words like bravado to describe this and contrast it with confidence. Confidence, for example, is based on evidence. Bravado, if it's based on anything at all, is probably based on potential. And I'll break that down a little bit. Evidence, experience, I've been here before. These help to develop calm confidence. But often we're faced with situations that we haven't had the opportunity to build our confidence around, new situations. But we believe that if we don't have confidence, we'll wind up performing poorly. So we wind up substituting bravado. As I said, bravado is based on potential, but that makes it a fragile sort of confidence because potential is a tricky thing. I was reading a post about potential and how in many cases promotion decisions are based on the idea of potential. But according to this article, potential is a hard thing to measure. It's a hard thing to trust. Now, I'm not saying it's not a thing. I'm not saying it's not real. I think it's a word that we use for a lot of different vague sort of qualities that we feel about a person. In this sense, potential is, I think, similar to trust. I trust. I hope that they can do that. Or I hope that I can do it. The problem with bravado that relies on potential is that it's too easy to claim without evidence. So every time somebody talks about potential, they need to add the investment phrase. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Potential is, I'm on this trajectory through life, and people that have been on this trajectory before Some of them have continued on this trajectory. So I expect to continue on this trajectory as well. Well, that's fine as far as it goes, but many people also have not continued on that trajectory. Maybe you were like me. I was a great high school student, but not a great college student. And it's interesting because college admission decisions are made at least partially based on potential. And there are plenty of other scenarios where potential comes into play. For example, we think that people are good athletes in one area, therefore they should be good performers in a different sport. So this is another example of thinking in terms of potential. But often we pull bravado out as a substitute for actual confidence. It's not really that it's a bad thing. It's that it's not the best thing. Bravado is pretty easy to drum up, perhaps in many of our worlds, because many of us have been good students. Many of us have been captains of football teams. Almost anybody can point back to a history and have some successes that they can claim as a trajectory, and then they claim that that trajectory will continue. And this is what we're talking about when we say potential. So bravado to me is a shallow kind of confidence. Now, it's interesting because it's associated with another kind of confidence. And it's a similar problem. It's tricky to base confidence on a general sense of being good at something. And back to performance sports. Some areas of some specific category of sport. So think a good gymnast. Well, a good gymnast is not necessarily good at all the different apparatus. There's plenty of basketball players that can shoot three-pointers, but perhaps are not good from the free throw line. So how good you are is important, but I'll say maybe not specific enough to the situation. And so again, this is kind of a fragile, almost a counterfeit confidence. It's not bad, it's just not the real thing. That doesn't mean it's not necessary or useful in some circumstances, but I think it does mean that we would rather try for the real thing, the real confidence. Now, this does bring up a particular issue that's recently been named. I say recently, it's recent as far as I know. It's this idea of imposter syndrome. In my mind, imposter syndrome doesn't exactly equate to a lack of confidence, although many people will say it does. I do think it's easier to feel like an imposter if we don't have confidence. But we want to be careful because I believe that imposter syndrome is simply a natural reaction to a truth in our lives. That truth is, as we're getting good at something, we have to, in some ways, pretend we're already good at it. And when I say pretend we're good at it, at least have the mental mindset of, yeah, I can do this. At least be in the right place with the right people and the right equipment. Yeah, I can do this. So when we're learning, we act like the kind of person that we've seen be successful in the area that we're trying to learn. And I use the example of learning to play golf. Well, if you're going to learn to play golf, you pretty much have to be an imposter. And the way most people do it is they buy this big old ugly bag, this single purpose. They put 13 golf clubs in it. They buy some funny looking shoes and they go to a special place and they start doing golf. They're mimicking the things that they've seen other people who play golf do. So they are literally pretending to be something that they're not yet. People walk up and say, "What are you doing in those goofy shoes? You're not a golfer." Oh, okay, I'm not a golfer yet. And this is kind of where imposter syndrome factors in. I'll say there's a specific concern that I have that supports trying to avoid imposter syndrome. My children, when they were a little bit younger, used the phrase try hard in a negative sense. They would say, oh, I don't want to be a try hard, or talking about somebody else. Well, they're just a try hard. Now, if that's not coming through for you, it's TRY-HARD, try hard. Now, I didn't understand what this meant because I always figured trying hard was a good thing. Their view of the try hard is pretty close to a view of imposter syndrome. They use it to refer to someone who's just pretending to be good at whatever their thing is. But I fear that this shows a lack of interest in preparing well and in working hard. In the same way, it's pretty easy to get imposter syndrome, particularly now that there's a name for it, and to think that's a negative thing. I think imposter syndrome is just a natural thing that is our brain recognizing the situation. So I'll try to make another distinction here about confidence. Confidence is not this casual, oh, I got this, hold my beer kind of situation. I think that's a little bit more fading towards bravado. And with confidence, you can say, I got this because I had this, that, and the other thing. This experience is similar enough to other experiences that I have had that I can have a reasonable degree of certainty that I can succeed. It's not, well, I'm generally good at stuff, so I ought to be good at this. My concern with this notion of try hard is that we've got to be careful to not prepare an easy excuse for failure. If we've got the image that somebody who's good at something can do it casually, can do it off the cuff, then I think we've really got the wrong image. What we may be doing is helping ourselves prepare an easy excuse for failure. And this is how this works. If I can say when I fail, well, I didn't try hard, then I don't have to face the feedback of I wasn't any good at it. I can fall back on, well, I didn't put my best effort in. And if I had put my best effort in, then I'm sure I would have succeeded. And we use this to deflect the feedback that comes naturally from the situation. So I think we want to be careful about how we handle imposter syndrome. Again, imposter syndrome, in my view, is perfectly natural and reasonably accurate. You are literally being an imposter. You're pretending to be someone who can do the thing that you're trying to learn to do. I don't know of any other way to approach a learning environment. I learned to play the electric bass in the last 10 years as a very mature adult. I had to act like a bassist. I had to go and buy an instrument. I had to get a strap, put it on. I had to sit in certain ways. I had to hold my hand certain ways. And all of this is pretending to be something that I was not yet. And so if we say, well, imposter syndrome is bad, I don't think that's true. I'd say if you're feeling imposter syndrome, it's a sign of growth. It's a sign of trying something, and it's a sign of learning. Because again, I don't see how you can effectively learn without being an imposter, at least to some degree. But the takeaway is, let's make sure that we're not using imposter syndrome to frighten us away from putting in a solid effort. If we just go through the motions of a new scenario and then use that as an excuse to deflect the feedback from our effort, then I think that's a waste of time and a waste of good information. So we need to go ahead and care enough to put our best effort in. In this scenario, there's this notion of defensive pessimism versus strategic optimism. And I'll break that down a little bit here. Defensive pessimism is thinking that you're not going to succeed. And the value of that is you look at all the angles, all the ways you could fail, and you try to anticipate all those challenges. We prepare for those challenges and not thrown off when they show up. So that's positive defensive pessimism. On the other hand, strategic optimism is thinking that the outcome is going to be pretty good. It's a means of motivating good effort. And it's easy to see how these two ideas might conflict. Which one's better for good performance? Defensive pessimism or strategic optimism? I'm in the early stages of research on this question, and I haven't found any clear data, but I think it's an interesting question. In the meantime, I'll stick to strategic optimism, but then I tend to be an optimist. So some of that's an aside, but I did want to deal with this notion of imposter syndrome and want to make clear, I don't believe that just because you feel like you're an imposter means you lack confidence. You may lack confidence because you have no evidence. Well, that's fair. You're brand new at the thing you're doing. So with all of that background, let's get into how we go about building confidence. So I think we've talked about why confidence is important, and we've talked about some fake confidences as a way to motivate the idea of doing the work of building good confidence. And this is where Zinser's book really shines. Again, I'm back to the confident mind. We've got to build our confidence in the right way so that it's not these false or shallow confidences. We've got to be careful because in many ways, our own brains will discount our experiences. Our own brains may be telling us that, yes, we've succeeded in similar tasks, but this one is very different. And so our brains and our fear response may fight with our confidence. We want to build this stronger confidence so that we can put forth our best effort when we face the situation that we're preparing for. In the shallow confidence areas, I mentioned that potential is particularly hard to measure. It's hard to assess, it's hard to define, but we know how to measure experience. We know how to measure training. We know how to measure preparation or practice. We can look back and we can say, yes, I've had this part of this experience X number of times. We can say, hey, I've had coaching in this area. Or, hey, I've studied this area. We can say, I've practiced it, or I've got experience from previous similar scenarios that will apply here. We can actually measure and track these things. And that's a solid support for this sound confidence. So we can measure it or we can measure parts of it. So if you want to build confidence, do these things in the area of performance, in the specific scenarios you expect to face. And experience provides lots of these things, but may not completely provide them. You may have some holes in your experience that are hard to see from where you stand right now. So a lot of these things are challenging. Practice is challenging. But we can measure these things and we can say, yes, I've done this some number of times before. I've had training. And I've had training from these very good people who have shown that they can do this. I've prepared, I've practiced. I'm walking through a routine that I've developed. So as we're doing this and we're learning and we're building this confidence, one thing that's very important, we know that if we want to build confidence in others, then we want to praise their effort. We want to praise the work. And we want to avoid praising any trait. What I mean by that, praising the trait is, look how smart you are. You did a great job. Or look at how artistic you are. This is a great painting. Instead, we want to praise the effort and the work ethic that went into it. Oh, that's a lovely painting. It looks like you really took some care to do that. Or you ran a really good time in the race. That's really hard work, and I'm proud of you for working that hard to get the result that you want. And these are good ways to build confidence in other people. Unfortunately, I've done the opposite to my kids. They'd show me something and I'd go, wow, you're really talented there, aren't you? And that's a mistake that I wish I could take back. Since praising the trait is not a way to build self-confidence in other people, it's also not the way for us to build confidence in ourselves. So when we look back at previous successes, we need to think about the work and the effort that went in and mentally praise our work ethic and effort. Hey, I'm talking to myself. Hey, Larry, you really practiced hard to be able to do that. And this builds, if not confidence per se, it at least builds a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. I've talked about that other places. So to build confidence, we need to take a particular view of our previous experiences and think about the work and the effort and the process rather than thinking about a trait or some inborn skill. So that's one way to build this good confidence. Another way to build confidence is to get feedback. And this is a tricky one because before you have confidence, feedback's hard to deal with. But that's when we need it the most. Get feedback. For now, I'll say feedback is an important component of growth and future performance, and it's an important piece of data for confidence. The phrase that came to mind for me, confidence grows over time and feedback is the fertilizer. But we need to be careful to not settle for the wrong kinds of feedback. We need to be careful to not use the wrong kinds of fertilizer. So confidence grows and feedback, either from the environment, from our results, from customers, other observers, is an important component of confidence. When we look at feedback, I'll say we're not very well trained at receiving feedback. What I mean is there's lots of training programs on how to give feedback, and there's lots of complaining about whether or not feedback is constructive feedback. So I did another podcast on this whole thing. I'm reviewing that here. But I think it's important when we talk about confidence. So first, I would say look for feedback, beg for feedback, seek feedback. But help people give you the kind of feedback that you need. And by the kind of feedback you need, I don't mean just glowing reviews. I mean feedback. And there's at least two areas where you can work to get the right kind of feedback. One kind of feedback is on performance quality, on process. Here, your question is, did I do it right? You want to seek this as much as you can from people that are good at doing what you're trying to do now. The interesting part here is that these people are probably not your customers. Did I do it right? What did I do wrong? These are questions for your coach. It's a question for experts in your field. What did I do wrong? A lot of times it's easier to get feedback from customers, but customers are not experts in what you do. You might even have to pay experts for their feedback. We have a word for this. We call them coaches. The other kind of feedback that we need is feedback on result quality. Here, customers are experts. They can do a great job of answering questions like, did it work? Was it useful? Was it helpful? Did it perform up to your expectations? And these are really two different ideas because you can do it right. You can follow your process, but still have a bad outcome. Now, process and outcome are related, but it's not a 100% correlation. If you want to think about this, see my episode in Thinking in Bets, and that's a book by Annie Duke. And specifically, the idea that I want you to think about as you go back to that podcast is the idea of resulting. We have two different kinds of feedback, and we want to get the right one from the right source. And when you get it from a source, recognize what kind of feedback it probably is and what it's good for. Negative feedback, which means either no, you didn't do it right, and that's from the experts, or no, your solution didn't work for me, that's from customers. Don't take it personally. It's not about you. Anytime you hear negative feedback, apply it to your process. And this helps to depersonalize it. Negative feedback hurts our feelings. And so if we make negative feedback, we imagine that negative feedback is, oh, I need to fix my process. That keeps us from getting our feelings hurt. You can imagine if we get our feelings hurt, then we're going to call somebody, that's an illiterate dunderhead. What are they doing giving me feedback anyway? And that's the first step to ignoring the feedback. So try to think about negative feedback in terms of, well, that's feedback about my process. It's not feedback about me. And then the best way to process that negative feedback is to use it to figure out how and how much you're going to change your process. How specifically is my process failing me? What's the effort involved in changing the process? How do I change the process such that it addresses the specific feedback? When we get feedback, we want to be looking for as much feedback as we can get. We want to look to experts in our field for, did I do it right? Am I following a sound process? And we want to look to customers for the other kind of feedback. Did it work? Was it helpful? And I think this will help us handle feedback in ways that we can use it to build the good kind of confidence. We can use it as evidence without it getting emotional for us, where our only defense is to ignore it or discount it. Okay, theory about how to build confidence. Great, Larry. I need me some confidence. I'll go about building it. But that's not where the rubber meets the road. Where the rubber meets the road is, what do you do when you're in the situation? The image in my mind is of a guy in the basketball game who's a bad free throw shooter, but winds up on the free throw line at the end of the game. If he hits his free throws, the team wins. And if he misses his free throws, they lose. So here we are. Rubber meets the road in terms of confidence. What do we do in this situation? Because we're all going to face it. Can we have some confidence in this situation? And I'll say the mindset here is about presenting who we are in a situation, thinking, what kind of performer are we? I'll say in this situation, the first thing we probably need to think about is processing our nerves properly. We need to process that nervous feeling in a particular way, that is, as an adrenaline reaction. Your brain gets scared very easily. When it gets scared, it pumps adrenaline into your system. And adrenaline has predictable effects on your body. Adrenaline changes our blood flow patterns to some degree. And adrenaline is your body giving you the kind of energy you need in order to have a good performance. We fight nerves in a couple of different ways. We fight them by downplaying the importance of the situation. I believe that rarely works because it's really hard to fool your brain because your brain starts off being scared. So we think that we can reduce our nervousness by saying, oh, it's not that big a deal. Don't worry about it. And I think that probably. I'd say we need to just recognize that this thing happens to human beings in these situations. This adrenaline thing, it results in shaky hands because the blood flow to your extremities is limited. It results in butterflies in your stomach because blood flow to non-essential systems like digestion is also limited by adrenaline. Sweaty palms, sweaty forehead happen because adrenaline is producing this extra energy for us, and that can raise our body temperature. A lot of the best performers in the world in any specialty have really learned to deal with the adrenaline problem. They never really stopped getting it. They learned how to process it. Adrenaline is a sign that your brain is afraid, but your brain's fear mechanism is hyper-tuned. What I mean by that is if you're giving a presentation, you can be as bad as you want, but they're not going to kill you. In fact, they're probably not even going to injure you. The worst thing that could happen is they go, wow, he's not a very good presenter. To which you respond, okay, fine, I'm not. This is my first outing. There's no real reason why I should be good. Thanks for listening and thanks for giving me feedback. So in the moment, we want to deal with the adrenaline reaction. And the second thing, we want to think about our previous successes and don't think about failure as much. And this is hard. But if you think about your successes, then you can think about process. If you think about failure, you're automatically thinking about results. Back to basketball. I was watching a game and the game had reached one of these situations. This bad free throw shooter was on the line with the game in his hands. And somebody asked this former coach who was in the announcing booth, asked him, what's the right mindset for this guy to deal with this situation? And it's a great question. He's aware that he's not a good free throw shooter. He's also aware that the game is on the line. And that coach said something that I thought was amazingly clear and accurate. And he said, your only real choice, if you're in this situation, is to say to yourself, well, they put the wrong guy on the line this time. I'm the right guy for this situation. Here we go. In this way, you have enough of a positive outlook that you're willing to put forth the effort required. You're able to focus on your process and not necessarily on the result. So anytime you're in this situation, the best you can do is to think, and it's not, I got this, hold my beer, or this isn't important. It's, I'm the kind of player that comes through in these situations. And then let the chips fall where they may. I don't believe you'll be any more disappointed in a bad outcome because you expected the outcome to be good. You'll be just as disappointed when you see the looks on your teammates' face. But this is a solid way to get into a decent mindset when you're in a situation and you know the odds are stacked against you. So one is deal with the adrenaline response. Two is get the right mindset going. And three is draw on parallel experiences. Think to yourself, I've performed well under this circumstance before, or a circumstance similar, or a circumstance that could be similar to it. I've dealt with stressful situations before. Here we go. So, as I said, this is where the rubber meets the road with confidence. Once you're there, you're in the situation, you really have no choice but to act. So put on your confidence. Now, this may be the relationship between confidence and courage. And I won't go all the way down this path, but just to mention that. It may be that it takes courage to have the right mindset. So think about that the next time you're in this situation. 3 things. Deal with the adrenaline response. Tell yourself they fouled the wrong guy. And think back on positive experiences where you got a good outcome so that you can reflect on your process and not worry too much about the outcome. Let's do a quick recap so I can tell you what I told you. We talked about confidence is important because it could impede delivery. When we don't have confidence, we tend to hesitate over delivering our result, and that's bad. It's bad for productivity, it's bad for cost, it's bad for our customers. So we don't want lack of confidence to interfere with our delivery. We also don't want to be fragile in the face of feedback. And confidence helps us take feedback on and do with it what we're supposed to do with it. Now, we talked about real confidence as a mindset, as a well-developed mental approach. When we face certain kinds of situations, we set our mind in motion in these well-developed ways. The problem is that mindset is constructed over time, and we probably need to put effort into constructing it the right way. Real confidence is based on evidence from previous performances. It's based on a process that has become a routine for us. And it's based on solid preparation, solid training, and solid practice. We talked about a couple of counterfeit confidences. We talked about bravado. I think bravado is probably based on potential rather than historical evidence. And that's not a great way to build confidence. And we also want to be real careful about building confidence on how, quote, good, unquote, we are, because then that puts us into this trait mindset. We talked about a tricky position, which is imposter syndrome. And I'll say, I don't think imposter syndrome is really a lack of confidence. I think it's a very natural thing. And even if we think of it as a lack of confidence, it's a real lack of confidence. It's an actual lack of something that we don't have. And perhaps a signal that as we get better, as we practice more, as we learn more, then that confidence will build. We talked about the good ways to build confidence. This is something we know. Take training. Make sure you're praising the work or effort, not some trait. Seek feedback. Get lots of feedback. Then we talked about how to handle feedback. And most of handling feedback properly is recognizing the sources of particular kinds of feedback and how you incorporate feedback into your process. Don't take it personally. Think they're talking about my process. They're not talking about me. When the rubber meets the road in the moment, process adrenaline. Think about previous successes and not about failures. Think in this particular situation, I'm the guy for this job. I've got one more tip, but I'll ask for your feedback before I get to that. Let me know how this is working for you. Since you're probably not an expert podcaster, just talk about whether the content is useful. That's where you're an expert. Shoot me an email. My email address is larry@dobusywrite.com. Or if you want to connect and find it easier, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you do that, please just tell me you listen to the podcast and I'll accept the connection. Either way, I'd love to turn what is now a monologue into a dialogue. So this other tip I alluded to. I think it's important in the moment to have a "they love me" file. I do this, I coach people to do it, they find it terribly useful. Keep a file of good feedback, because not every challenging situation is thrust on us with no notice. Many times we have the opportunity to process for a little while before we begin the actual task or performance. And having at your fingertips a file of good feedback from customers or good feedback from other people, it's very useful to be able to whip out that file in these circumstances so that you can think about the good outcomes that you've had in similar situations. So go ahead and start saving up those good clippings out of the newspaper. I don't know how useful it is to save your grandmother's happy birthday card, but what the heck. Joking, but clearly the more accurate to the situation the feedback is, the more it's going to help you. And take a minute before you actually start performing in one of these situations to have a quick review of those things. I hope I've done a good job of connecting confidence and productivity. And I hope that you've been able to explore ways to build this confident mindset over time. And I hope that you'll put these into practice. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the Attention Compass process. Attention Compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusyright.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do Busy Right.